We interrupt this program to bring you an important Wayfair message. Wayfair's got style tips for every home. This is Styles McKenzie helping you make those rooms sing. Today's style tip. When it comes to making a statement, treat bold patterns like neutrals. Go wild, like an untamed animal print area rug under a rustic farmhouse table from Wayfair.com. Arr, fierce. This has been your Wayfair style tip to keep those interiors superior.
Wayfair, every style, every home.
I hear your cat meowing too.
Yeah. I'll just let her say hello.
Yeah,
It's not even,
all right.
not even my cat, but this is Rue. Hello. This is certainly going to be a clip that we put on the internet.
Sup, nerds? It's basketball. Welcome to Horse, a basketball podcast about everything except for the wins and losses. My name is Mike Schubert, and I'm joined by my trusted co-host, the divorcing her contract with the Phoenix Mercury to then signing with my beloved Seattle Storm. This person I'm talking about being Tina Charles, but it's Adam Mamawala. Adam, how's it going?
You lost me there, but that's all right. You're going to explain the whole thing, so.
Yeah, we will certainly get into a very, very spicy contract situation that does involve one of the greatest WNBA players of all time joining my team, which is very cool. But we'll get into that after a little bit. We've got a very fun episode here, a very fun interview, lots of spicy stuff going on in the MenBA and the WNBA. How are you feeling with everything, Adam? We've had the draft, free agencies going on. WNBA All-Star Game is this weekend.
Yeah, as we record this, I think by the time it will come out, hopefully the Bulls will have offered Zach LaVine his deserved max extension. So I'm feeling pretty good. Draft was fun. There were a lot of cool emotional moments that we'll talk about. You know, enjoying the summer and enjoying playing softball with you.
Yes, it's been very fun. We just came off of a win.
Softball reference, ding, 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 ding.
Ding, 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 ding. Just came off of a big softball win yesterday, so the vibes are great. And let's make sure our vibes stay great by truly preparing for this episode in the place where the vibes are born, the Teal Memorial Locker Room. Teal, phenomenal vibes, impeccable vibes.
I'm told Teal's doing great.
She's doing great, and anytime I surprisingly see Teal at a live show, especially in a city where she does not live, it's always a good time. Teal, what are you doing here?
I mean, Teal drove to Atlanta to see me perform in, what was it, a bagel shop? I don't know. I hope it was worth it. Thank you, Teal.
Well, you know who definitely would drive to a bagel shop, maybe even just to get bagels with us?
I would say our patrons, and probably our newest patron.
Yes, shout out to our newest patron, Tesney Patty. If I said that wrong, please let me know. But thank you for supporting the show. And of course, thank you to our producer level patrons for your continued support. Polly Burge, Kendra Hadley, Salvatore Testa, Trust the Process, Siobhan Ellsbury, He Sells Seashells, Don't Go Chasing Taco Falls, Bang, Bang, Long-Suffering Timberwolves fan, Roast Beef Debris, Kay the Conqueror, Basketball is Life 2, Michaela Loves Allison, Denver Steam Nuggets, Anna Borgelli, Weird Questions, Chris Rossi, Mitch Chrysler, Steph Cutlery for 3.
Bang!
I didn't read this one before reading. That's a very good joke. Manu Ginobili and Nicole Arsenault.
Well, for anyone who's not understanding why we keep doing that, one of our patrons, Eileen Gazesh, in honor of the former patron Steph Curry for 3, changed their name to Steph Curry for 3, but requested that we change it a little bit every time we record an episode. So before I slack Shubes, the patrons, I change it a little bit, and then I let him be surprised by Steph Vindaloo for 3, or Steph Curry for 4 rings, or Steph Cutlery for 3. It's going to be a great time.
I'm very much looking forward to it. You know what else I'm very much looking forward to?
Continuing to be sponsored so we can keep doing this show.
Yes. Can you tell us about our sponsor this episode, Adam?
I certainly can, and thanks so much for asking. This podcast is sponsored by BetterHelp. People don't always realize that physical symptoms like headaches, teeth grinding, and even digestive issues can be indicators of stress. And let's not forget about doom scrolling, sleeping too little, sleeping too much, undereating, and overeating. I feel like we say this pretty much every episode, but there is a lot of stressful stuff happening in the world, particularly lately. Stress shows up in all kinds of ways, and in a world that's telling you to do more, sleep less, and grind all the time, here's your reminder to take care of yourself, do less, and maybe try some therapy. I am a big proponent of therapy. I mention that every time we are sponsored by BetterHelp. And here's the deal. BetterHelp is customized online therapy that offers video, phone, and even live chat sessions with your therapist, so you don't have to see anyone on camera if you don't want to. And Lord knows, we've all had to see too much of each other on camera in the past 2.5 years. If you don't want to, that's totally totally fine. It's much more affordable than in-person therapy. I certainly agree with that as a New Yorker where therapy is exorbitant. Give it a try and see if online therapy can lower your stress. Horse listeners get 10% off their first month at betterhelp.com/horse. That's BETTERHELP.com/horse.
Yes, and we also want to thank Multitude for having us as a part of the collective. You're all caught up on Horse. You want to listen to something in those 2 weeks in between. Why don't you check out a Multitude podcast? There's a bunch of lovely ones. There's this one show in particular I think you would like if you enjoy me. It's The Newest Olympian. If you have never read the Percy Jackson books before, or you love the Percy Jackson books and you want a kick of nostalgia, The Newest Olympian is here for you because it's me, Mike Schubert, a grown man who never read the Percy Jackson books as a kid, reading them for the very first time. And each episode I am joined by a PJO, big ol' fan that loves the series, and we go through chapter 2 at a time. We do special episodes about the mythology in the chapters with Dr. Moya McTeer. It's a very fun show. I'm very biased, but I think you are going to love it. These books are really good if you're looking for a more lighthearted read in the very fun world we live in right now. I highly recommend reading the Percy Jackson books, and then this can be like your digital book club, and there's all these other listeners that you can talk about the books with. It's a very fun time, and you can search for The Newest Olympian wherever you get your podcasts, or you can go to thenewestolympian.com, or you can go see us live in New York City on August 24th. So lots of fun stuff happening with The Newest Olympian.
Very, very cool. I have to say, given your whole business model as a podcaster, which is adult man reading books for children, I'm wondering if there is a podcast where children read books that are for sure for adults. Does that exist?
When I birth a human,
Yeah.
and by I mean Kelly, because I won't do any of the hard work. I'll only do the easy part. But then I'll be a very good dad, and I'll do anything that Kelly needs when she has strange cravings and such.
You know we're recording this, right? She'll keep the receipts.
Oh, I know. Don't worry. And the one thing I will say here, when couples say we're pregnant, no, you're not.
Yeah, it's so
You
weird.
are not. One of you is pregnant. You are both. I think saying we're expecting is okay, but clearly one person's putting in more work with just the pregnancy element.
Absolutely. It's even weirder. I know male comedians who I'll see them doing a show like a week after they've had children, and they're like, I just had a baby last week. You personally? At least a we acknowledges that there are multiple people involved. So anyway, my pitch for you is your 5-year-old reading In Cold Blood or something that's like not
I was going to say,
appropriate.
once the kid turns 8, they're doing a podcast about Crime and Punishment. Get the Dostoevsky
Perfect.
dusted off, and let's read about Raskolnikov and him walking down the stairs for 37 pages, and then we'll keep it going. Man, that book sucks. That book is so bad.
The worst book I've ever read is Robinson Crusoe.
Ooh, okay,
I know it was
never
like the
read it.
first novel ever, and you can tell. Like nothing happened. It's like 500 pages of him assembling a boat, and then he realizes that he built it in the woods and can't get it to the water.
This was my hot take when we had to read really old books is this book good, or were there just 6 books out at the time?
Yeah.
But you know what breaks the mold? Pride and Prejudice. That book is so good. That book is so good, and it holds up, and it slaps, and it's genuinely funny. Incredible novel. Ugh.
To circle it all the way back to basketball, which apparently is the focus of this podcast,
Sure.
Despite popular opinion. It reminds me a little bit of the whole JJ Redick thing where...
When he was talking with Chris Rossi about Bob Cousy playing against plumbers and firemen.
Exactly, yeah. It's like, well, what was the competition? What was the competition for Robinson Crusoe? The Bible?
So with that complete, we can get into our first segment, which we like to call Full Court Press. Get it? Like the news?
Yes, I do get it.
There's lots of news. Currently, as we record this on June 30th, NBA free agency is underway. So I feel like we will kind of save that more until the next episode once all of the dust settles. One thing we will say is that the Hawks and the Spurs had a big trade where the Spurs traded their best player, DeJounte Murray, who's a 25-year-old all-star. He's very good at basketball. He propelled my fantasy team to their first place regular season finish. Traded him to the Hawks for 3 first-round picks and a first-round pick swap. 2 of the picks from the Hawks are completely unprotected, which in draft terms means no matter how good the pick ends up being, they get to keep it. Usually you'll have some sort of protection where, if it's in the top 5, you don't get our pick this year, we'll give it to you next year kind of thing. There are no protections on this pick, which is a huge ad. So
it is. That can be like a franchise-changing stipulation.
Right. That is the kind of thing that can get you a generational talent. So the Spurs are going all in on tanking, and the Hawks are going all in on trying to build around Trae Young by basically getting the perfect companion to Trae Young in that DeJounte Murray is very good at defense and Trae Young is allergic to defense. So it's going to be very interesting. I'm very sad because there were some minor rumblings of DeJounte Murray going to the Knicks, and I love DeJounte Murray. He's one of my favorite players in the NBA. So I was unfortunately given some false hope when there was rumors and burbles of he might go to the Knicks.
Don't worry. The Knicks are going to give Jalen Brunson $100 million a year. Everything's going to be fine.
Not per year, but total. And you know what? I think it's going to be okay. He's a very good basketball player.
No, I like Jalen Brunson. Also, I know you hate Trae Young because you're a Knicks fan, but it would be pretty hard to play good defense when you're that small.
Yeah, and when your hair is that bad, it's just hard. You're just so much negative energy from your terrible, terrible haircut. So we'll discuss more of the NBA free agency when all of the dust is settled. But I do want to give a shout out to Marcus Smart, who was talking about people giving him negative feedback. And he said the following, quote, "I hear the talks about he's not a true point guard," talking about Marcus Smart, "and this and that. They need a star point guard. Well, we've had star point guards, and yet this so-called non-point guard is the only one that's led them to the finals. Shots fired at Kyrie Irving."
Ooh, yeah. Yeah, I don't think that's directed at Isaiah Thomas.
No, and it could be, but truly he was saying, hey, you had one of the greatest point guards that everyone considers in the NBA of all time on the team. Nothing happened. I was the lead point guard, and look at us go. Give me my respect. My name is Marcus Smart. I have green hair for the entire playoffs, and I looked great.
Yeah, no notes.
Mm-hmm. Now, the NBA draft also took place, and I didn't really watch any of it. You were more invested. What were some fun things that happened? I know there were sentimental moments and men crying on TV, which I love.
Yes, it's great. Normalize men crying on TV and everywhere, not just on TV.
Cry, do
Yeah,
it.
I watched it in its entirety. At least to clarify, I watched like the first 20 picks because that took 3 hours. The biggest news immediately was that the Orlando Magic drafted Paolo Banchero out of Duke, number 1, which was not expected. A lot of people thought that they were going to go with Jabari Smith, so that was kind of a surprise. But Banchero went number 1. Then the Oklahoma City Thunder drafted Chet Holmgren, who is a very large and very slender man who kind of looks like Slenderman, out of Gonzaga. A lot of people are very excited about him. I'll just go over the first few picks. The Rockets drafted Jabari Smith out of Auburn, who was thought to have potentially gone number 1. The Kings drafted Keegan Murray out of Iowa. And then the Pistons drafted Jaden Ivey out of Purdue. And that was one of my favorite picks because Jaden Ivey got incredibly emotional, like to the point where when they were interviewing him after he was picked, he could barely even talk. And you saw this throughout the entire draft. There were a lot of connections, not only with former NBA players, but also with former and current WNBA players, which is really cool because we'll talk about this a little bit in our interview that we've already recorded. But given how long the WNBA has now been along, we're going to see more and more of these connections. And hopefully we can get to a point where we're just talking about basketball in general. We don't have to talk about men's basketball, women's basketball. We'll just be talking about basketball. But Jaden Ivey's mother played for the Indiana Fever, who Mike saw courtside earlier this year, and is currently the coach of the Notre Dame women's basketball team, which is one of the best programs in the country. So Jaden grew up around women's basketball and grew up around basketball. And also getting drafted by Detroit was really cool for him because he has family connections there as well. His grandparents, or I believe grandfather, lives in Detroit. And actually his grandfather played for the Detroit Lions, which is really cool.
And his mom played half of a season for the Detroit Shock.
Oh,
her final year in the WNBA. Yeah.
Very cool. But yeah, across the board, really nice stories. Honestly, I was very impressed by the vast majority of these. I'm going to call them kids because they are kids. I mean, most of them are 19 years old. And I have to say, if there's any saving grace to the social media generation, I think it's that people know how to present themselves on camera in a way that we wouldn't have when we were growing up. And what I mean by that is these are all highly touted prospects who knew from the time they were 14 that they were trying to get into the NBA. And I was really, really impressed with the composure that a lot of these people had. They seemed very mature for the ages that most of them were. So a lot of credit to them. Outfits were fantastic, as they always are. A lot of cool touches with those. Your Knicks did some interesting things in which they drafted someone from New Zealand, and then that pick was traded to Oklahoma City. So ultimately, I don't think the Knicks actually drafted anyone, did they?
We got one dude, but I think it was in the second round. But yes, we basically traded away our pick for some future picks because we had decided, we had the 11th pick, and we had decided all the people we would have wanted aren't here, so we're just going to kind of punt it down the road for future years. We also did this last year, and I kind of get it, especially when you have young people on the team, you're trying to bring in free agents. It makes sense. It is just uneventful. It's probably the smartest decision based on what the Knicks are trying to do, but it's just not fun. You want to have your team pick a dude.
Totally.
So it makes it sad for me, but I think we're going to have an interesting free agency where we're trying to sign some dudes, and we were kind of designing our team around that. And it's more beneficial to have picks for trading purposes as opposed to a rookie that is unproven.
Right. And my beloved Bulls had the 18th pick, and they drafted Dalen Terry out of Arizona. So Dalen Terry is a large guard. Dalen Terry is 6'7", known for his defense, can score also, but primarily known for his defense. Seems like a really cool dude. I didn't know that much about him, but given the other players that the Bulls have at guard, including Lonzo Ball, Alex Crusoe, and Ayo Dosunmu, those are some really good defensive guards. So I'm very interested to see how he'll fit into the mix. Obviously, it might take him a while to work his way into the rotation, depending on what other moves the Bulls make this offseason. But all in all, a fun draft. It was, it's just happy to see people's dreams coming true. Let's just say that. It's always nice to see that work pay off for people.
Right. And I think the big takeaway is that Jaden Ivey is going to be the greatest basketball player of all time because he was one pick after the Sacramento Kings. Because if you look at recent Kings picks, they are always one pick away from greatness. And they should have just taken Jaden Ivey. He was the consensus number 4 best player in the draft. But instead, they picked someone who fits better with their team, which is always a mistake that people make, drafting for fit instead of doing what is called just BPA, best player available. In 2011, they took Jimmer Fredette, and he was one pick ahead of Klay Thompson. In 2012, I don't even know this guy's first name, but it's T. Robinson, and I want to say Terrence, but I couldn't tell you. One pick ahead of Damian Lillard, and in 2018, picked Marvin Bagley III, one pick ahead of Luka Doncic. So
Yikes.
It feels like Jaden Ivey is going to be a great basketball player. And if you're listening to this and the names Jimmer Fredette, T. Robinson, and Marvin Bagley don't sound familiar to you, that's why.
I like the idea of picking by fit, meaning like picking by outfit. Like you have no plan for the draft, and then you're just like, who was the best dress? They are going to be on our team.
Imagine if the reason the Oklahoma City Thunder picked Chet Holmgren is because he had that very cringy, but shout out to him because he likes it and that's all that matters, bedazzled dice chain. Yeah. He had this chain with dice on it that was bedazzled, and it looked like, oh, this is what an 18-year-old kid would buy and say, this is cool. And you know what?
Yeah,
we all have to make our mistakes.
And it's also one of those things where, like, when they asked him about why, he said, like, the most generic answer ever. Like, it would have been cool if there was, like, some personal story connected, but he was like, I got these because I bet on myself. It's like, well, that's what I expected you to say.
I'm very happy that I now get to say the opposite. So if the vibe sounded very good in this recording, it's because I'm first ever time recording this episode with a gold chain. And is because I was considering getting a necklace just in general. My dad always wore one. I thought it would be a cool look. And I was telling my mom about this because I always consult my fashion decisions with Barbara Schubert, who's a very fashionable woman. And I was telling her, like, yeah, I think like rope gold chains look really nice. And she goes, I think I have an extra rope gold chain from my mom. So my grandma, just, chilling in her jewelry drawer. Just she had two of the same one, and my mom wears one, and she's like, I have this other one. Do you want it? And I was like, yes. First off, free necklace, which is much better than paying for one. But second, now I get to say it's my grandma's, which is way cooler than if someone asks what's up with the chain. And I go, oh, I bought it because I think it looks cool. Now it's just, This is my grandma's chain. 1,000 times cooler.
I love it.
So to round up Full Court Press, we have two things happening with the WNBA. One, sad. The other, spicy. So the very quick sad update is that the Brittney Griner situation is not necessarily improving. They've extended her detainment by 6 months, and I don't know that a lot of information was given about why. They just kind of said, we're extending it by 6 months, which is ridiculous. Obviously, the situation's way out of hand. Thankfully, the WNBA is really ramping up their awareness about the situation. They've got Brittney Griner on the courts, on T-shirts. She was named an honorary all-star starter. They're really putting in the work to try to bring more notoriety to it. And she's already been there for such a long time. To extend that by 6 months is ridiculous. So I really, really hope that the U.S. government is able to get her back, because it's getting to the point where I'm very concerned for Brittney Griner's mental health. Like, I'm just so worried that this is going to be, I have no idea what the living situation and living conditions are, but I don't know. This is just like the worst version of being in a lockdown ever. I cannot fathom what she's going through.
Yeah, I mean, being in prison in any context seems horrifying and disturbing and would absolutely take a toll on your mental health. Being imprisoned in Russia, especially in light of everything that's happening in the world, it's a very frightening situation.
Yeah, so all of our best wishes for Brittney. Hopefully she can come home safe. But let's now end Full Court Press on the spicy thing that happened in the WNBA. And I'm obviously very happy about it because it ends with Tina Charles is now in the Seattle Storm. But regardless, this is a very spicy situation from start to finish. We will link to 2 ESPN articles that recap this situation very, very well. But for anyone unaware, Tina Charles, first off, incredibly good at basketball. She's a former MVP. She is an 8-time WNBA All-Star. She won the scoring title not too many years ago. In 2021, she won the scoring title. So that was, let me just check my watch, last year. So she's very good at basketball. This offseason, she signed with the Phoenix Mercury because she has not won a WNBA championship yet. She won in college at UConn. She was number 1 overall pick in the draft in the WNBA, but she's never won a ring. So she's at the point in her career where she's like, look, I want to get a ring. Let's make it happen.
She's in the Kevin Durant going to Golden State phase of her career.
Kind of, yeah. Now, she was deciding between the Storm and the Mercury this offseason, and she ended up picking the Mercury because she thought she would fit in better with their roster, especially with Brittney Griner being gone. It seemed like, okay, Brittney Griner plays center, I play center. If she's not going to be here for a while, let's get me in there and I will fill in for her role and play really well. Unfortunately, she still did play well. And when I saw her live playing with the Mercury against the Indiana Fever, she was a beast. She had 31 points, I think. No one could stop her. You got the ball to her down low, and anyone playing defense, it was just like, good luck. What are you going to do? Her post moves are incredible. She can throw anything at you. However, she wasn't getting as much offense thrown her way as she would have wanted. She wasn't shooting as many shots as she does. Her points per game was 17.3, which is still a lot, but it's the lowest she's had since 2015. So she was unhappy that she wasn't as big of a focal point in the offense. And then there were just lots of tension between her and some of the other players on the Mercury. Now, what happened from there is something that, I will be honest, I did not know was a thing that could happen in the WNBA, but they divorced their contract. They basically came to a mutual agreement of, look, this isn't working out. This isn't what we wanted. So she and the Mercury parted ways. I don't know exactly if she gets all of the money. I don't know if it's like an NBA buyout, but regardless, she had been making comments throughout the season about either wanting to be traded or cut or divorced from the contract. And then finally, this past Saturday, we're recording this on June 30th, she divorced the contract. And then once you divorce the contract, you are on what's called waivers. And this is in a lot of different sports. And any team could have picked up Tina Charles for her contract. However, because her contract was for $108,000, which is pretty high by WNBA standards, no team had cap room to bring her on. So she was definitely going to clear waivers, which would then make her a completely free agent. So she could pick any team that she wanted to sign with. And what team did she sign with? The Seattle Storm. So now she's on the Seattle Storm for a veteran's minimum contract. I did watch the game last night between the Storm and the Aces, and Tina Charles is very good. She came off the bench, which is a wild thing where it's like, oh, look, our bench player, one of the greatest WNBA players of all time.
Wow.
And now she's on the Storm, and she had an incredible quote about it that I think just shows you how much of a badass Tina Charles is, because she's been in the league for quite some time. She joined in 2010. It is currently 2022. So 12-year career. She's 33. She's getting up there in age. I don't know what sparked this question. Maybe someone asked her about retirement, and she said, quote, "I'll retire when I stop getting double and triple teamed."
Hey, I like
it's
it.
So good. It's so
Perfect
so
answer.
good. Yeah, just an incredible answer. After the divorce happened, there was some press about it. Tina Charles did a press conference with the Storm, and basically she said that she's got a small window left. There's a certain way she wants to play. She wants to play for the ring, and things with the Mercury didn't go as she wanted. The Mercury weren't playing super well. Can you blame them, though, with Brittney Griner being gone? I'm sure that's not an easy situation for anyone. But for the most part, Tina Charles didn't want to say too much about it. She wanted out, she got out, and she said, quote, "At the end of the day, championship or not in my career, but the way I went out was playing with upstanding individuals, upstanding character players, and coaching staff. That's not to say not what it was in Phoenix, but I just felt this opportunity. There was more there from what I saw and what I heard, having close relationships with the players." So it feels like, in the nicest way possible, she was saying, look, the Mercury was bad and I didn't like anybody there.
Yeah, but still a fairly diplomatic way to go out. And one final note, speaking of WNBA championship rings, shout out to Candace Parker of the Chicago Sky for throwing out the first pitch at Wrigley Field earlier this week.
Yes, a big old baseball reference.
And singing the 7th inning stretch. Did she know the words to Take Me Out to the Ball Game? Not all of them, but do I care? Nope. It was great.
I didn't know I hope they paid her overtime.
That's like a thing at Wrigley Field, is that the person who throws out the first pitch, if they're a bigger name person, will sing the 7th inning stretch and kind of lead everyone in honor of Harry Carey.
That is very, very fun. So yeah, we'll continue to see if any other spicy quotes come out. I think the Phoenix Mercury fans were chanting "fuck Tina Charles" in the first game they played after she was gone, or maybe her last game. I feel like I saw a clip of that, which is fun. And what was fun now with the Storm, they were playing the Aces, who are also very good at basketball. There were 7 number 1 overall picks on the court at the same time.
Whoa.
Which is just ridiculous. 70% of the people playing basketball at one point in the Storm versus Aces game were number 1 overall picks, which is ridiculous.
Cool. Yeah, that's wild.
Really, really wild stuff. So spicy things happening. My Storm are looking good. I'm stoked. And the chances of Sue Bird now winning the championship and then retiring, which is the coolest way to retire.
Yeah.
Those just jumped by a lot, and that will be very interesting to watch. And now the game that I'm going to live with Sal Testa, we're going to Phoenix because we wanted to see Diana Taurasi and Sue Bird play. Now it's the Tina Charles revenge game.
I tell you something, just keep all of your fingers and toes crossed for everyone's good health.
Yeah, hopefully no fights, hopefully just trash talk. When I went to that game live, Skylar Diggins-Smith did lots of trash talk. Diana Taurasi a little bit, but Skylar Diggins-Smith was doing a lot of trash talk, mostly with the refs, which was very fun. So we'll see. I feel like it's going to get chirpy, and I hope there are no fights with fists, just fights with words and basketballs. So with that complete, we have wrapped up Full Court Press, and we will get into a very fun interview that we did with repeat guest and incredible author Andrew Maraniss. And now we have a very special interview with a returning guest, a New York Times bestselling author, the author of 4 incredible books about sports, history, social justice, all the good stuff. It's Andrew Maraniss back on the show. Andrew, how's it going?
It's going great, Mike. Adam, thank you for having me back. It's really fun to be back on with you guys.
Of course, our pleasure.
We are very excited to have you back. Last time you were talking about your book, Games of Deception, which was about the men's basketball in the Olympics. Now, this time around, you have a new book coming out, or depending on when people are listening to this, already out. And it's called Inaugural Ballers. And it is about the beginning of the Olympic women's basketball team, which is very exciting. What was it like to have written the book about the men's team and then switch course writing it about the women's team? Similarities, differences, anything interesting along the way of researching?
Yeah, well, the whole reason that I had the idea to write this book is because of that previous book about the men's team. So, I was visiting a lot of high schools and middle schools around the country, talking about Games of Deception and the first men's Olympics team's experience at the Berlin Olympics in 1936. And I remember at a school in Marion, North Carolina, and then at a school in suburban Kansas, I was asked questions by students in the audience. Well, what about the first women's team? You're here telling us about the first men's team, but what about the first women's team? So I want to give credit to the middle schoolers for suggesting this topic. And of course, it made so much sense to do. And so I remember emailing my agent and my publisher while I was on the road in Kansas and saying, hey, this kid had a great question. This needs to be the next book. And so there are some obvious similarities in terms of the importance of both of these Olympics in launching basketball internationally or increasing the popularity of basketball in the U.S. One major difference is the American men's team in 1936 was a prohibitive favorite, to win the gold medal. in the Olympics, and they did. A lot of the rest of the world hadn't really caught up yet. But with the women's team in 1976, the American women were lucky to even qualify for the Olympics. They didn't qualify at the World Championships the year before. There just happened to be one other last-minute qualifying tournament for the last two teams. The USA Basketball had such little confidence that that our team would qualify at that tournament that they hadn't budgeted for them to stay or practice or eat, in the time between that tournament and the Montreal Olympics. And so when we won the silver medal in Montreal in 76, that was considered a great victory, a real underdog story. And so that was probably the biggest difference, is just the state of women's basketball in the United States was not nearly as good as the Soviet team in 76, which dominated international tournaments and won the gold medal at those Olympics. And now, we never even lose a game in Olympic women's basketball, let alone don't win the gold medal. So things have really come a long way in that regard.
I find it funny that you would say the silver was a great success, whereas now if we got the silver, something catastrophic would have had to have happened.
No doubt. And the other thing is we actually won the silver medal in those Olympics. You think about a silver being that you lost the gold medal game. Mm-hmm. But the way they played the tournament in 76, it was a round robin. And it just was like, well, how well did you do in the round robin? And the second best team won the silver medal. So we beat Czechoslovakia in a game that won us the silver medal. It wasn't like we lost to the Soviets. So there's pictures of the American women jumping on each other in celebration of winning the silver, which would never happen now.
Yeah. I was just going to say, I kind of love that anecdote about that student asking you, what about the women's team? Because it's such a simple but effective illustration of something that you talked about a bit in the press kit that you sent over, which was like, people have this narrative of like, who cares about women's sports? It's like, people absolutely do.
A lot of people.
And I don't know if that was a male or female student. Frankly, it doesn't really matter. But the fact that someone asked you about that, I think is a great representation of that. And along those lines, your book obviously intentionally coincides with the 50-year anniversary of Title IX. So for people who are not super familiar with that, can you give us a kind of a breakdown of what Title IX represents and why it's important?
Absolutely. Yes. So 2022 is the 50th anniversary. We just, as we're taping this, it was last week that was the literal day. June 23rd, 1972 was the day that this legislation was signed by President Nixon after Patsy Mink, Edith Green, Birch Bayh. It was Democratic senators and representatives, but a Republican president that signed it. And it was a 37 words. It had nothing to do with sports. That was really all about equal opportunities for women in higher education, and saying that schools at all levels, from elementary school to college, could not discriminate based on gender in terms of the offerings for women, and did not mention sports. But pretty quickly, it was sports that became the primary beneficiary and sort of the headliner of this new law. And so, older listeners will remember the days when, if you were an elementary school student, a girl, the gym was only used by the boys. If you were a high school girl, there would not be varsity sports for you at your high school. Or if there was, it was maybe one sport, where the boys had multiple sports. There might be a tennis team for the girls that didn't get to play on the real tennis courts, but had to practice in the parking lot. There might be a track team for girls that might have to give up a meet that they were planning on hosting for months, just because the boys team decided they wanted to practice. It was completely unfair situation at all levels. You had schools, let's say in the SEC, I work at Vanderbilt now. Vanderbilt didn't offer a varsity women's basketball team. University of Tennessee didn't have a varsity women's basketball team with scholarships. If you were a girl in Tennessee that wanted to play, you looked at schools maybe like UT Martin or Belmont, the small schools that were actually the only ones offering these sports. You had Immaculata College, a small Catholic school in Philadelphia that had the very best team in the country because the big schools weren't paying attention to women's sports yet. But after this legislation in 1972, there was a period of a few years where the new law was interpreted, rules were written by the HEW, and what colleges and elementary high schools were going to have to do to abide by the new law. And so it wasn't until the late 70s that you start to see the major schools that we think of start to offer scholarships for women athletes. The NCAA itself had fought Title IX tooth and nail. So now you see these PSAs and commercials, if you're watching sports on the weekend, where the NCAA is celebrating the 50th anniversary of Title IX, which it should. But the truth is that back in the 70s, as the legislation was being proposed and regulations were being written as how to be implemented, football coaches, athletic directors were saying this was going to be the ruination of college sports if they had to share money with women. And just it's ridiculous to read the quotes that, I found as I was researching this book where they're saying essentially it's going to be too expensive to be equitable. So we can't do it. And of course, it was an argument that was preposterous and ultimately was defeated. But you still see.
And even recently, I think you're maybe going to allude to this within the past, year or two. During March Madness, we saw the incredible difference between the facilities for the men's players and the women's players.
Absolutely. I mean, and thank goodness for social media, where you had women's college basketball players shooting video for anyone to see. It was plain as day to see that the weight rooms that they had at the tournament were not the same. The goodie bags that they were receiving for the same tournament were not the same. The food that they were given was not the same. And so that's the story of Title IX is, yes, a lot has changed in the last 50 years. But a lot hasn't changed. And so it's an incomplete story. There's still so much more to be done.
Yeah. And for anyone who doesn't understand the context of what we're talking about, we'll share some links. Basically, during March Madness, the men's facility was this expansive, enormous, any machine, any equipment you would want.
Equinox, if you will.
Yes. And then the women's. So if we're going to say the men's facilities were Equinox, the women's facilities were like the quote unquote gym at a shitty Ramada. It was like one treadmill and two weights that didn't match each other.
Right. The weights were just piled on the floor. Right. Yeah. Right. It was outrageous. And I think it was undeniable. And unfortunately, it seems in all sorts of issues, including, gun violence and other shoot school. Like if there's video, it becomes harder for people to deny it. And in this case, thank goodness there was video. And so you saw things start to change at this last tournament.
Mm-hmm. Something I think is interesting about the inaugural women's team is something that I heard Sue Bird of the WNBA recently say on a podcast is that when she came into the league, she was one of the first players to go through the entire career arc of what would now be the standard, which is you go to school, you get drafted, you play your career, you retire, you figure out your post-career. Because before she started school, when the WNBA first started, just 4 or 5 years prior, these women had already been playing overseas or whatever. So on a similar way, when you were doing the research and everything for the inaugural women's team, was there any sort of perspective of what it was like for the women on the team to just have absolutely no blueprint in front of them for what it meant to compete internationally and go to the Olympics? This was the first time anybody on the women's team had done this.
Yeah, and they all came from such different circumstances to arrive at that moment in time to be on the team. So you had someone like Nancy Lieberman, who was still in high school, is playing for the U.S. national team. You had Pat Head, later Pat Summitt, the greatest women's basketball coach of all time, many people would say, who was a player on the 76 Olympic team, but had already graduated from college and was the head coach of the University of Tennessee, and she's playing on the Olympic team. You had Ann Myers, who was the first woman to receive a 4-year athletic scholarship to play college basketball, was at UCLA. You had women who came from small schools that don't even exist anymore. Julian Simpson played for John F. Kennedy College in Wahoo, Nebraska, which is a school that only existed for 10 years. She was from the East Coast. She went out there because they played a full season of basketball. That was good enough for her. She saw this brochure that had pictures of swimming pools and these elaborate facilities. It turned out none of those pictures were from things that were actually on campus when she got there. So the women had come from all sorts of different circumstances. These were some of the first Black women on the U.S. national team also that made the Olympic team in 76. Coaches had, limited international experience. It was all brand new. That's what made it exciting in some ways, but that's what made everything that followed, really stands on the shoulders of these first women in 76. I told you that they hadn't really budgeted for the team to make it to the Olympics. Even once they got to the Olympics, they all had to stay in one dorm room. God. The entire team, all the coaches piled into one suite. They had 2 bedrooms and they're sleeping on bunk beds in the kitchen, right? They had one bathroom to share. You think about both the men's and women's Olympic teams now, they typically rent a yacht, right? That is docked outside the site of the Olympics. They were staying on multiple bunk beds in kitchens and sharing a bathroom in Montreal. So none of the same circumstances that the teams have now. Some people will paint this as like a romantic era where they were just playing for the love of the game, right? And I think it's important not to fall into that temptation. Yes, there were no promises of a professional career afterwards. Yes, they had overcome a lot of obstacles, but they deserved better treatment. And so it wasn't a romantic era. They were doing the best they could under the circumstances. But I think it's important not to romanticize what they went through.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. I think that people want to believe that that's noble. It's like, no, they should have been allowed to have played for more than just the love of the game. That's kind of the whole point. We did a feature on Lucia Harris a few months ago, and I'm happy to know that she's getting the recognition that she deserves now, in part because of that great New York Times documentary. But I saw that you had actually had the chance to speak with her before her passing. And just from the New York Times doc, she seemed like such an amazing, warm person. What was that experience like getting to chat with her?
Yeah, it was a really remarkable experience. Of course, when I interviewed her, it was before the New York Times documentary, which really opened up so much more about her that I wish I had known at the time that I talked to her. And this was also during COVID, so I wasn't able to travel down to Mississippi to see her. We just talked on the phone. And I really wish I had had that chance to meet her in person. But, as shown through in the documentary, just such a sweet, thoughtful, humble person. You think about her being the best player probably in the country and one of the best players in the world, and the opportunities that were denied to her, the circumstances that she grew up in the Mississippi Delta, in extreme poverty, just shooting on a hoop that was nailed to a pole in the backyard, and becomes a pioneering player at Delta State, scores the first basket in the history of Olympic basketball, drafted in the NBA. And I do think it was a publicity stunt when she was drafted, but really just exemplified the lack of opportunities for great women players back then. But my first book was about Perry Wallace, who was a pioneering African-American basketball player at Vanderbilt in the 1960s. And then to have a chance to interview someone like Lucy Harris, who was an overlooked pioneering player in women's basketball, just was really a highlight personally for me.
That's awesome. Switching from the individual players to the event itself, when the women's basketball tournament was added to the Olympics in the 70s, was there any sort of general hubbub and hullabaloo where people are like, oh, grumble, this is going to be a boring thing to watch, blah, blah. I felt some of that recently with some of the new events added. I remember people were thinking 3-on-3 basketball might not be good. Why is there women's 3-on-3 basketball? And then our women's team was like, that was the most electric event from the past Summer Olympics, was watching Kelsey Plum just destroy everyone. Was there similar backlash just to the thought of, oh my goodness, women's basketball, gross?
I don't know that there was that. I think the overriding reaction was there not to be much of a reaction. Even in the Olympic movement, there wasn't all that much excitement about adding the sport. The Soviets had actually tried to have the IOC vote on adding women's basketball going back to the 1950s and were repeatedly denied. Avery Brundage, the head of the IOC, was really not in favor of women's sports to begin with, and also was not a fan of team sports. So women's basketball had a lot of hurdles to overcome to even be included in the Olympics. Bill Jones, who you might know as the one that was at the center of the controversy of the 1972 men's game against the Soviets, the controversial ending,
right.
The head of FIBA at the time of the Olympics, came to Montreal to sort of drum up support for the Olympics in the year leading up to the games, and was shocked that none of the media in Canada knew that women's basketball had even been added to the Olympics. So really, it was ignored, which is just as big of a problem, I would guess, as you alluded to, saying that people were aghast about it. They were just ignoring it. When the first game was played between the U.S. and Japan, it was the game that kicked off the women's tournament. It was played at 9:00 in the morning, so not exactly prime time. The American women were not too happy about that. Their coach, Billy Moore, once she found out that their first game would take place at 9, was getting them up at some ungodly hour, 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning for the week leading up to that first game. The players hated that. One of the assistant coaches would walk through that dorm I mentioned, just banging pots and pans to wake up the players early. To protest. Several of the players showed up wearing their pajamas to one of those early morning practices. But then we lost to Japan in that first game. Imagine the United States losing to Japan in Olympic basketball now, but we did. And some of the players felt like they were tired, that they would have rather have just gotten their sleep leading up to that game rather than, pretending that they had a game at 9 a.m. every day. So wow. A lot of things that you wouldn't imagine happening today happened back then in 76.
I tell you what, if as a general rule you don't like team sports, you're kind of limiting yourself in terms of what sports you can watch.
Absolutely. I mean, the other knock on women's basketball was for those men leaders in the IOC and in different governing organizations, if there was going to be women's sports, they were okay maybe with gymnastics, right? Or swimming, diving, sports that they considered more feminine, right? But the idea of tall, strong, athletic women, sweating, banging up against each other in the paint, they felt like that wasn't quote unquote ladylike. Fortunately, I don't think that young women who are into basketball or volleyball or other sports today put up with that notion quite as much. But that was something that these members of the 76 team had to deal with their entire lives. Just this idea that they shouldn't even be playing basketball, and that wasn't what women were supposed to do. And that hope sort of shines through as a theme of this book, is that there's no one way to be a woman or to be a man or to be any human being. There's no one way, right? And that people should be free to pursue what their interests are, what they're talented at, and that these women in 76 really, their accomplishments are all the more remarkable given the hurdles they had to overcome.
Right. And what's cool now is that when you look at the modern WNBA, this is kind of the first generation of women who got to grow up watching the WNBA. And I think that makes a huge difference. And even the NBA draft, which was last week, you see all of the WNBA connections now within the NBA draft. We had Jaden Ivey, whose mom played in the WNBA. So,
Adam, it's funny you said that. I literally just wrote a sentence that was very similar to that about this generation. My next book, I'm doing a series of books for younger kids. So my books now are really considered young adult books, and high school kids are considered the primary audience, although adults probably read my books more than young people. But my next set of books is for even younger kids. We're talking like first grade, kindergarten even. And it's a series that's going to be called Bigger Than Sports, about athletes who have done important humanitarian work, outside the field of play. And the first book is about Maya Moore and her work on criminal justice and, freeing Jonathan Irons from prison. But, she grew up, she was 7 years old when the WNBA started, and Cynthia Cooper was her first favorite player. And she would wear Houston Comets jerseys, and she carried around a WNBA basketball. And I wrote that she was really part of that first generation of young girls that had these role models playing in the WNBA. And that's what she wanted to do. And she was able to see that and to accomplish that. And I think that really makes a huge difference. These women in 76 didn't have that. That's not to say that there wasn't women's basketball before. Of course, women were playing basketball from a week after James Naismith invented it in 1891. There was some women that were school teachers in Springfield, Massachusetts, that heard about this new game, and they came by to watch. And then they asked if they could play. And he said, well, you can play, but there's a problem. No other women have ever heard of basketball. So who are you going to play against? And so they ended up playing against the spouses of some of the teachers there at Springfield College. Then Cinda Berenson at Smith College meets James Naismith and asks about this new game. And so she was sort of if Naismith is the father of basketball, Berenson is the mother of basketball. And she starts teaching it to women there. I'm here at Vanderbilt. There are women playing basketball here in the 1890s. And so the sport of women's basketball went through a lot of ups and downs. It would become popular. And then you would have men and some women say that, like I said earlier, that it wasn't a feminine sport. And so the sport would be going through areas where it was really oppressed, right? And it would go up and down, up and down. And finally, since the 70s, I think you could say it's here to stay, in part because of what happened at the Olympics.
Yeah, I think it's almost impossible to overstate how much impact it has to see something modeled that makes it seem possible for you. Speaking of this, it makes me think of my favorite photo from the 8 years that Obama spent as president is that photo of that small black boy touching Obama's hair in the White House. And it's this very visceral moment of oh, this is possible. That's a moment that 5-year-old kid is going to remember for the rest of his life. And, as we record this 50 years after Title IX and seeing how far not only women's sports, but women's basketball specifically has come, if you can answer this, where do you hope it is 50 years from now?
I hope that there's really not a distinction between, let's say, the NBA and the WNBA. It's just basketball, right? Or when the Olympic tournament comes around, the people are just as interested in watching the women's tournament as the men's tournament. I see young boys even wearing jerseys of women's soccer players, right? Or WNBA players. And I think that's something that didn't exist when I was a kid, but my kids now are 9 and 11. They're just as interested in watching the Women's College Softball World Series as the Men's Baseball World Series, right? Even using terms like men's baseball or men's college World Series versus women's, right? Yeah. Not accepting that the men's one is the default, and then you call the women's tournament, right? Things like that. Media coverage, you're starting to see with name, image, likeness in college sports now that a lot of women athletes have been the first beneficiaries of that. It hasn't been equitable entirely in terms of if you look at the racial breakdown of who's getting the deals. But I think that it's been proven that women's sports, when supported, are just as popular as men's. I think in the last Olympics, in the Tokyo Olympics, I read a study that said it was the first time that the primetime coverage of the Olympics, there was more coverage of women's sports than men's. So, people will watch it if it's provided, if the marketing and support is there. So I think that we'll continue to see that over the next 50 years. However, with all of my books, which are about these social movements, about racism, homophobia, sexism, the same time that we see progress in certain areas, we see multiple steps back in others, right? So my most recent book is about Glenn Burke, who is the first openly gay Major League Baseball player. And I'm writing about gay rights movement and the backlash to that in the 1970s. There's been no greater backlash to it than we're experiencing right now, to the point that schools are banning books like the one I just wrote, right? So we're having this discussion a week after, just a couple days after the Roe decision, overturning Roe in the Supreme Court. And so what impact is that going to have on women's athletics? I think that's yet to be seen. It's not going to be a positive impact. And so there seems to be incredible hatred towards women that shows through in different ways in our society. And so at the same time, we see women's sports gaining in some ways, we see all women being persecuted in other ways.
Yeah, I mean, it's utterly depressing to ask you a question about what 50 years in the future is going to be like and not quite know if it's going to be better or worse.
Yeah, I mean, that we sort of think that, of course, things get better, or even hear sayings like, the arc of justice is coming, like as if it happens automatically. And I think what we're reminded of every day, it seems, is that no, nothing is guaranteed, that progress is not guaranteed. Every generation has its fight. And it's really depressing to know, at least the way I think about it, that fight is against the people who are maybe in the next office, right? Or in our own neighborhood. It's our fellow Americans. It's not some war against some foreign body, right? It's our fellow Americans that we're really up against right now. And it's depressing. I don't know that I feel entirely optimistic about the way things are going to turn out. And it really gets me down when I think about my own kids in terms of climate change and gun violence and all these issues that are so pressing right now.
Yeah. I think this is a kind of a perfect transition here. When you think about what women athletes have had to contend with over the past 50 years, what parallels do you see now in 2022 with the rights of trans athletes having the ability to compete at sports at all levels? Yeah,
well, my basic belief on that is that sports should belong to everyone and that everyone should be able to compete. In talking to some collegiate athletes, women athletes, most of the women that I've talked to don't have a problem with transgender athletes competing against them. But one thing that one woman brought up was that the difference she saw, and she was still in favor, but she felt like there were certain things that she had to deal with her whole life as a woman that maybe someone who had gone through athletics as a male through high school wouldn't have had to deal with, and so that she felt there were certain advantages that person might have, not in terms of their strength, or size or speed or whatever, but just in terms of the way, maybe some benefits they had received as a boy athlete prior in their life.
That's interesting.
And so that was a nuance to the discussion that, I didn't necessarily think about before, but I still don't think that overrides the fact that in general, the discrimination is wrong. We've seen that proven over and over in so many different ways, and that sports should belong to everyone. I also think the issue is overblown. The people who tend to bring up this issue of this is unfair to women athletes have not been supporting women's athletics in any other way.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And so that's the hypocrisy that bothers me. And I think that people should be mindful of that as they're having these discussions.
Yeah. The most they've ever cared about women's sports is to exclude people from it.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah. I mean, these are the same people. Anytime ESPN tweets something about the WNBA, they would reply with, "Oh, show a real sport." They're the same people who are going to quote tweet something and say, "Oh, this is a travesty to women's swimming, which I suddenly care about now." Like, all right, Ralph, sure.
Right.
Okay.
No doubt. And that hypocrisy bothers me, but I also have kind of come to realize that the hypocrites don't really care if you call them out on their hypocrisy.
They're proud of it.
Not at all.
Yeah, they're proud of it. It's a badge of honor to them. And I think in sort of the social media culture, like pointing out hypocrisy feels like a win to some people, but it's not nearly enough.
No, not at all. There's only so many times you can quote tweet someone and be like, haha, look how silly they look. And then it doesn't achieve anything.
Yeah, right. Some arguments just not worth having.
Totally. I think what would be nice, and it was something you had brought up, just getting to the point where it is just basketball. It's not men's basketball. It's not women's basketball. It's refreshing when you hear some of the people currently in the NBA or rookies in the NBA just talking about the WNBA, not in some sort of special way. Like when people are asked who's your favorite player, they list off a man in the NBA and they list off a woman in the WNBA. That's very cool. You say, who's your favorite player? Oh, I like LeBron and Diana Taurasi. Great.
Yes,
just
right.
trying to have those lines not so distinctive, like, well, my favorite men's player and my favorite women's players. Just no, these people play
They're basketball players, right?
It's just different versions of the same game.
And that's the way most of these women on the 76 team considered themselves, in part because they typically grew up playing with the boys. That was a common thread amongst a lot of these women. Nancy Lieberman, especially famous for playing at Rucker Park. Pat Head Summit grew up playing in the barn with her brothers on the farm in Tennessee. Ann Myers playing against her brother Dave, who goes on to an NBA career. It tends to be the people who are really good basketball players, NBA players, that have the most respect, right? Or at least express the most admiration for women. And it tends to be the guys who are sitting on their couch who can't play a lick that criticize women's sports the most. And when I was doing research about Title IX and this whole era of women's sports, there are a lot of men that would say, that they were opposed to women playing athletics as if they were protecting women, right? The women were frail and they were protecting them, and that there could be some damage to their ability to have children, right? Or that they, shouldn't have muscles and things like that. When really what this entire effort was to protect the frailty of men who couldn't handle it, that what they considered their, realm of athletics could be infiltrated by women, right? That there might be a woman who was actually better at them or more knowledgeable, if they were just talking about sports, threatened by the women actually having opinions, right? Yeah. And so really this whole, it turns it on its head that it was not about the frailty of women, it was about the frailty of men.
I relate to this a lot in a completely different context, because as a stand-up comedian, a lot of the female comedians that I am friends with talk about this a lot, where it's a challenge for them to date in the way that for male comedians, it's like, oh, you meet someone after a show, it's easy. Because I think men are incredibly threatened by being with a woman who's funnier than them or smarter than them, or, it's very interesting how much you see that across all fields, not even just sports.
Yeah. This fragile male ego, Ann Myers talked about when she was in elementary school, she was fast and there was a boy that was fast. And so he challenged her to a race and she won, but the teacher said, oh no, the boy won, and just didn't want to damage this boy's ego. When she was trying out for the boys basketball team, the same thing happened. She was better than most of the kids on the team, but she faced incredible pushback from the parents of the boys who were embarrassed that their son got beat, and she took him to the hole or something. And so this fragile male ego shows up in multiple places in this book.
Yeah. And you'll also see it anytime you have an NBA player, like you were saying, some of the people who truly understand the game the most will appreciate the women's game the most. And then any sort of reply or comment section thing would be people thinking, well, surely this player can't genuinely like the WNBA. This has to be some sort of woke agenda. This is clearly them being paid by the WNBA to talk about liking this player. It's like, no, this person just knows basketball. They appreciate a good basketball player. And sometimes it's not anything, there's no next step. It's just, she's good. And I like the way she plays. And it's as simple as that.
Right. Appreciate excellence where you find it. When you think about this 76 team, I would have loved to have been there in Montreal to watch. The coach was Billy Moore, who won 2 national championships as a head coach, who was Pat Summitt's mentor. Like, she was Pat Summitt. You think about that steely gaze, looking at her players. That was Billy Moore first. Her assistant was Sue Gunter, who goes on to become one of the best college coaches in the country, famous at LSU. You had Pat Summitt playing on the team, Nancy Lieberman, Ann Myers, Lucy Harris. Like, these were phenomenal players, Most of the players are in the Hall of Fame. Both coaches are in the Hall of Fame. This was a unique collection of talent. There was no let's pity the team and watch it, right? And yet they were not the best, right? You would have gone to those Olympics and been amazed by the other countries, in particular the Soviets, who had a 7-foot center.
Wow.
Luzana Semenova was 7 feet tall, right? I mean, even today, that would be remarkable.
Yeah, it's
it was so
unbelievable,
phenomenal to watch her. Alex Ovechkin's mom was on the Soviet team, was a great player.
Wow.
Yeah,
Hockey reference.
The rarely heard hockey reference on Horse. We have a lot of baseball references, but not hockey so much.
And I'm more of a baseball guy, but I saw this name, Ovechkina, and then researched it was Alex Ovechkin's mom. So, it would have been a really special tournament to watch. In addition to it being historic, just the collection of talent that was on the floor in those games.
That's awesome. It's really like one of those old TV shows like Freaks and Geeks where you look at the cast and you go, oh my gosh, look at where they all ended up now.
Yeah, exactly.
And I'm curious, you mentioned, Andrew, that obviously the expectations were very low for this team and winning a silver was a huge achievement. Do you think that allowed them to play looser because no one expected anything? Or do you think they also felt the weight of like, hey, if we suck like everyone thinks we're going to, maybe they won't even have this 4 years from now?
I think they felt some pressure. Yeah, because the Olympics were close by in Montreal and it wasn't like it was in some other time zone. Even if the first game was played at 9 a.m., they knew that it would be easy for Americans to follow the tournament. They knew that the U.S. men, except in 72, always won the gold medal, right? And so they felt a little bit of pressure to succeed just as the men did. They felt like this was an opportunity to showcase their sport. In the locker room before the silver medal game, Billy Moore, the coach, gathered the women around and said that if they won, it was going to have an enormous impact on the sport and women's sports in general for the next 25 years.
Now go out there and just have fun.
Right.
No pressure.
Exactly. Yeah, I know. And that's kind of what I write about in the first chapter, that a coach has to choose their words carefully. You want them to rise to the moment, but not put too much pressure. Well, you could say, put the pressure on. This really matters. We have an opportunity. And she was looking back at the 72 Olympics when Olga Korbut was the gymnastics star. And she said it was after 72 that you started to see little girls in the United States, even though Korbut was Soviet, really start to pick up gymnastics. And it became a really popular thing for little girls in this country to do. She wanted the same thing to happen with basketball. And she felt like if they perform well, that might happen. And, and of course she was right in a lot of ways. And, I think a lot of people today, even though we all love basketball, but it's probably women's soccer team, national team that is the premier women's national team in terms of the World Cup and the Olympics and the name recognition of those players. And we can get into why that is. But it was the basketball team that came before. There was no Women's World Cup at the time. Women's soccer wasn't in the Olympics at that time. It was this 76 women's Olympic basketball team that was really the first U.S. national team that the country had a chance to follow and to watch and to feel proud of, and that made a difference. The numbers of girls playing basketball after the Olympics, I have the stat in the book. I don't remember it offhand, but it exploded. Popularity of women's basketball exploded after these Olympics. And so the coach was right. And the players did feel that pressure to perform.
Yeah, I think you're definitely right with the soccer team. And I forget which member of the women's basketball team pointed it out, but unfortunately, like a lot of things in this country, I think it comes down to racism.
Yeah.
She called out the women's soccer team as a bunch of pretty little white girls.
I think it was Sue Bird.
Oh, it was Sue Bird. Okay.
Yeah.
I thought it was Sue, but I didn't know if my Seattle Storm blinders were on. Yeah, it's just the women's soccer team is a bunch of pretty little white girls running around. And this is Sue Bird, who is now engaged to one of those pretty little white girls running around. But she called it out. It was just, the team is mostly white and deemed to be attractive, as opposed to the basketball team having black women and women of color that, aren't deemed to be as conventionally attractive. And unfortunately, that can find its way into sports when it shouldn't. It should just be, is the team good? Are they fun to watch? And not, oh, do I think the team is hot? It's ridiculous.
One thing I found out researching the book was that the team gathered in Plattsburgh, New York, at SUNY Plattsburgh before they went up to Montreal for the Olympics. This was sort of the gathering point for all the Olympians. I found a woman who had been a college intern at Redbook magazine at that time. And Redbook set up a beauty salon in the dorms at Plattsburgh to give makeovers and haircuts to the women Olympians ahead of the games, and then ran photo spread in the next issue, before and after, of them looking just like athletes and then looking like, they had just had this makeover. And it was a little bit of a nuanced issue. A lot of the players were happy. They had been in a training camp in Warrensburg, Missouri for a month, sweating every day, hadn't had a haircut in a while. They knew they were going to be on TV. So, I mean, fine. In some ways they wanted to look good when they were on TV. But in other ways, there's this expectation that if you're a woman athlete, your main responsibility is to look good on TV, right?
Right.
And so you felt that they had this a little bit of, turmoil in the inside when they decided whether they're going to participate in this makeover or not.
Yeah, and that's been a thing for years. I'm a big tennis fan, and there was an issue less than 5 years ago. There's a Canadian tennis player named Eugenie Bouchard who, after winning a match, the reporter said, "That's a nice outfit. Can you give us a little twirl?" And he was rightfully lambasted for that, because it was when's the last time you asked Nadal to spin around for you and show off his Capris that he's wearing? Also, fun fact, I once performed at SUNY Plattsburgh, and the show was delayed because there was a bat in the auditorium. So there's a fun little tidbit for you.
Well, we've all got SUNY Plattsburgh stories.
It's true. Every single person in the world has at least one SUNY Plattsburgh story. We are going to let you go here shortly, but I did want to ask you one final extremely hard-hitting question. Why do you think, Andrew, it is that people with the initials AM are superior?
Well, there's no doubt that we are.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I think that it goes back really more to the inferiority of others.
Right. Yes. Totally. Right? Yes. If there's any takeaway from this whole interview.
Yeah.
Well, Andrew, thank you so much for coming on, lending us your time, talking about the book. I'm very excited to check this one out. Andrew, best of luck to you on any future books you read. Or
write.
Any future books you write.
Honestly, best of luck reading books too.
Read.
Yeah, it's tough.
Good luck reading. Good luck writing. But no, as you continue your journey, seeing as you've written a book about anti-Nazis, anti-homophobia, anti-discrimination against women, I just hope you continue your journey of destroying your Twitter mentions. May you have continued success.
And where can people follow you, and where can people purchase the book?
Well, thanks for asking, Adam. Great softball. What's the equivalent of a softball question in basketball terminology?
A lob? I think a lob.
Yeah.
We threw you a lob.
It was a nice lob. So you can follow me on Twitter. I'm a Milwaukee Brewers fan, and so my Twitter handle is an allusion to that.
Ooh, I'm a Cubs fan. Let's fight.
All right, yeah, they're playing tonight, right, or tomorrow?
Look at you cute people, not 85 million games over 500 like my beloved New York Yankees.
Yeah, well.
Oh my gosh. Brewers are in first place, so we'll see you in the World Series. It's my Twitter handle, TrueBlue24, TRUBLU24 is my Twitter handle. Instagram is Maraniss. My website is andrewmaraniss.com. You can find Inaugural Ballers and all my other books at that website, or also at pretty much any bookstore or Amazon, wherever you find your books. Again, they're really billed as a young adult book, so if you have teens in your life that you're trying to get to read a book, they might be interested in seeing a basketball player on the cover, whatever it takes to get them into it. That's great, but I also write them in a style that I think adults like just as much. So they're really books for everybody.
Awesome.
Definitely.
Well, thank you again for joining us. This was a blast.
Thanks, guys. This was a lot of fun. I really appreciate it. I'll get a headband for my next interview like you, Mike.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Horse. Horse is hosted by Adam Amawala and Mike Schubert. Our editor is Misha Stanton. The social media is by both of the Horse Boys. The art is by Allison Wakeman. The website is by Kelly Schubert. And the music is by Bettina Campomanes.
Thank you to our producer-level patrons, Polly Burge, Kendra Hadley, Salvatore Testa, Trust the Process, Siobhan Ellsbury, He Sells Seashells, Don't Go Chasing Taco Falls, Bang, Bang, Long-Suffering Timberwolves Fan, Roast Beef Debris, Kay the Conqueror, Basketball is Life 2, Mikhail Loves Allison, Denver Steamed Nuggets, Anna Borjali, Weird Questions, Chris Rossi, Mitch Chrysler, Steph Cutlery for 3.
Way off!
Oh no! We gotta work on Steph Cutlery's shot. And don't forget Mono Ginobili and Nicole Arsenault. Follow us on Instagram and Facebook at Horse Hoops, and on Twitter at Horse_Hoops, because
Horse Hoops decided that the entire Olympic women's basketball team was going to live in a 2-bedroom dorm, and that's not enough bedrooms for all those humans.
It is certainly not. And a special shout out to Twitter account at BannedHorseHoop, that is at BANNED Horse Hoop singular, who is compiling all of the things that we shout out about why Horse Hoops got banned. So if you want to see why Horse Hoops did get banned from Twitter, that's a great account to follow. We really recommend it. But beyond that, go to our website, horsehoops.com, for links to some of the fun stuff we talked about today, including some NBA draft footage and a lot of the stuff we talked to Andrew about, and a little extra plug for myself. Go to my website and or my social social media. My website is adammamwala.com, and on Twitter and Instagram, you can find me at the same place, because we just put out the trailer for the series that I shot last summer. And as you are listening to this, my upcoming comedy album will be available for pre-sale starting July 1st.
Let's go.
And then it will be out on July 15th. It is called Statistically More Relatable, and I'm deeply proud of it.
Is there a preferred place to pre-order it from where you get the most money?
That's a great question. Not necessarily in terms of the most money, but it's cool to say that you debuted at number 1 on iTunes. So I would say for
Cool.
those who can purchase things on iTunes, that would be the preference.
Well, I'm excited for at 12:01 a.m. today
Hell yeah.
/ tomorrow to be
Yeah.
the first pre-order and send you the screenshot. And of course, if you want to support the show, you can do so on Patreon. You go to patreon.com/horsehoops and get access to all of the finals videos we did. Any level of patronage gets you access to the videos that we did for every single finals game, fun recaps if you want to hear us just being silly and seeing our faces while we do it instead of just the audio. There's that. There's a bunch of other stuff. There's physical goodies like jerseys and stickers. Lots of good stuff at patreon.com/horsehoops. And we're going to close out this episode as we always do by putting our hands in the middle and saying something on the count of 3. Maybe we can give some Tina Charles love and say, like, I'll stop podcasting when they stop double teaming me. Or
Sure,
something.
it's a bit wordy, but I'm into it. I like it a lot.
Okay, so we'll stop podcasting when they stop double teaming us on 3.
Okay, let's do it.
1, 2, 3. We'll stop podcasting when they stop double teaming us. Let's see if the audio linked. I trust Misha's ability, but I don't know.
Really put it to the test with this one.
We interrupt this program to bring you an important Wayfair message. Wayfair's got style tips for every home. This is Styles McKenzie helping you make those rooms sing. Today's style tip: when it comes to making a statement, treat bold patterns like neutrals. Go wild, like an untamed animal print area rug under a rustic farmhouse table from Wayfair.com. Arr, fierce. This has been your Wayfair style tip to keep those interiors superior.
Wayfair, every style, every home.